So, it's a rainy day. That means it's a good day for reflecting. How about we think about why ethical thinking is such a good thing and maybe good for us? See, I've been doing a lot of thinking about why ethics matters, why it's important for us to think about the right thing to do, or why it's important for us to think about what it means to be a good neighbor. And I've got some thoughts. But first, we gotta talk about all of the things that we talked about in class so far. So, I like to think about the different philosophers that we've touched on in our course as each offering something unique and instructive for us to think about as we try to, I don't know, figure out what the right thing to do is. So, I like to start at the beginning, but not the beginning of our class, the beginning of, well, where ethics kind of gets its start for philosophy, and that is talking about Aristotle. See, I think that Aristotle is helpful for us because Aristotle allows us to think about ethics as something we can get better at, right? Like, we can practice becoming more ethical people. We can practice being more generous or being more creative and courageous and magnanimous, right? But we can also recognize via Aristotle that we are people who build up certain kinds of moral habits that might not necessarily be good, but they speak to our character. And so if they speak to our character, then we can examine ourselves and do so on the basis of what we actually do rather than just what we intend. In other words, how you are being ethical matters a lot to Aristotle. Now, on the other hand, we can think about somebody like Mill and utilitarianism and learn from utilitarianism the vital importance of thinking about the consequences of our actions. For example, I might try and give a gift to somebody and trying to be, polite or kind or whatever, but the reality is I might actually be giving them something that will only exacerbate their suffering or might actually make things worse. And so in giving them a gift, even though my intentions might have been pure, I in fact did something that was, well, not very ethical. We have to think about what the end result will be. We have to think not only about our intentions, we've got to think about the execution. We have to think about the consequences of our actions. But you might be thinking, well, what would Kant say about this? What would Kant try to get across in a setting like this? Well, for Kant, just thinking about the ends and not the means, well, that's not enough. Because if you are only focused on results, you're going to lose yourself in the process. If you always say the ends justify the means, any means are necessary. And for Kant, that's not enough. See, to be ethical means that not only do we intend an ethical goal or end, but that the way we do it matters. It's not enough to have a good result. We have to be good while we're doing it. And we can achieve results that might seem beneficial, but we have sort of sold our soul to the devil in order to do so. And that is something that Kant recognized way back when he was writing as very, very tempting. Moving beyond Kant, we can think about, say, ethics of care. And in the ethics of care, what we have is something that I think is a bit more nuanced and asks us to begin from a different place. Rather than thinking about justice as some sort of goal to be achieved, if we begin by thinking about care, then we begin to see that every action that we take, even the most mundane, is invested with some kind of ethical importance. the care that we place into ourselves when we're brushing our teeth or taking a shower or dropping our kids off at school, or maybe sitting with somebody in the cafeteria, or maybe buying a coffee for the next person in line. All of these things speak to being cared for and our responsibility to care for others. Even if we might not have ever experienced justice, at some point all of us have experienced care. And that means that we need to think seriously about the role that care plays in everything that we do. Are we engaged in developing caring relationships? Right? Are we building relationships of care with our friends, with our family members, etc.? Or are we merely using people as a means to an end? Or pursuing abstract ethical principles rather than the needs of real concrete human beings? But Nietzsche would point out to us that, well, we need to be suspicious about our moral principles to begin with, because our moral principles might really be principles of power. And we need to think about the way that that power manifests itself not only in our lives, but how we exercise that power over others. For Nietzsche, all of these relations are not relations of care, they're relations of power. And there's something I think that's really true there. All of us have some modicum of power, whether over others or over ourselves, and how we behave. And how we exercise that power really determines a good portion of our character. What you do with your one life really matters. And how that one life impacts the one life of other people really matters. And so you got to think about these things not only in how can you be a sort of pure moral person, but you have to think about them in terms of whether or not these are truly moral to begin with. And that kind of brings us all the way back to Severson, and all the way back to thinking about ethics as responsibility. For Severson, drawing on somebody who I hold as a really near and dear philosophical influence, Emmanuel Levinas, responsibility draws us out beyond ourselves. And yet at the same time, responsibility is maybe the thing we are the most. I am not, the things I own. I am not my job. I am not my children or my spouse or my family or anything like that. I am my responsibility. I am what I care about and who I care for and how I do that. And so being drawn out of ourselves into responsibility, into thinking about responsibility with more nuance and with more, I would say, gravitas, like importance, is kind of where Severson leads us. What are we responsible for is not about what is the least amount I can be responsible for. What is the least amount of effort I can put into something and I don't get in trouble. Instead, Severson is asking us to think about the extent to which we are responsible, the extent to which I am bound to the others that I am connected to, and how far those extensions go. And so that brings us to the end. Why is ethics something that is good to think about? Well, I think that ethics is important and is good to think about for two big reasons. First, ethics gives us a way to think about our relationships. And I mean this in the sort of formal sense of these different philosophers provide us with tools in the way that we think. Ethics gives us an opportunity to think in a certain way, using certain methods, with certain goals in mind. And that changes how we might encounter something. We can think from multiple perspectives. In a given situation, a utilitarian, a Kantian, a virtue ethicist, an ethicist of care might think completely differently about the same circumstances, and that's really helpful. these tools give us new pathways to traverse in terms of our thought. But another thing that ethics does that I think is really important is that it gives us something to think about, and a good thing to think about, namely, what is owed to us and what we owe to others. What our relationships to others entail, and whether or not, even though we might be trying our best, we might be complicit in deeply unethical systems that are harming other people or exist based on the exploitation of others. And if that's the case, then maybe we have a responsibility to change those systems. Maybe we have a responsibility to think about them a little bit differently. And isn't that a better use of our thought than just following whoever is screaming at us the loudest? I mean, don't get me wrong, thinking is difficult. It's hard. It takes time. We can be wrong. Being wrong can feel real bad. And in many cases, being right is seen as something that is bound up in our being. But what I think ethics gives us is not just a way, but a what. It gives us an opportunity to think about something that is better than being screamed at, or that we should go buy something. It gives us an opportunity to use our thinking for good. And that, I think, is something we need a little bit more of. So, thank you for watching. Thank you for being in the class. And I hope you have a good one.